Hi, this is Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions, and you're listening to Briefings Direct. Our next business trends discussion explores the reinforcing nature of enterprise architecture and agile methods. We'll now learn how enterprise architects can embrace agile approaches to build more competitive advantage for their companies. To learn more about retraining and rethinking for EA in the digital transformation era, we're now joined by Ryan Schmierer, Director of Operations at Spark Services North America. Welcome, Ryan.
Thanks, Dana.
We're also here with Chris Armstrong. He's President at Spark Services North America. Welcome, Chris.
How are you doing, Dana?
I'm doing great. Ryan, let's start with you. What's happening in business now that's forcing this new emphasis for enterprise architects? Why should enterprise architects do things any differently than they have in the past?
The biggest thing going on in the industry right now is all around digital transformation. We've been hearing about DT for the last couple of years, and most companies have embarked on some sort of a digital transformation initiative, modernizing their business processes. But now companies are starting to look beyond the initial transformation and asking the question, what's next? And so we're seeing them look forward to digital transformation feeding into a focus on real-time, data-driven decision-making, with the ultimate goal of this concept of enterprise business agility, or the ability for the enterprise to be aware of its environment, respond to changes, and adapt quickly. For enterprise architects, that means learning how to be agile as well. And as you know, both in the work that they do as individuals and how they approach architecture for their organizations. It's not about making architectures that will last forever, but architectures that will be nimble and agile and adaptive to change.
Now, Ryan, we've heard this word agile used in a bit more of a, structured way when it comes to development, agile methodologies, for example. Are we talking about the same thing? Are they close? Are they related? Or is it just another use of the word agile?
It's actually the same concept. It's the idea that you want to develop or deliver results quickly, learn from what works, adapt, change, and evolve. It's the same approach that was used in software development over the last few years to look at how do you develop software that delivers value quickly. We're applying those same concepts in a couple of other contexts now. The first one is at the enterprise level, as we look at how does the business evolve more quickly and learn from its mistakes and adapt to changes in the environment. And then in the architecture domain, it's how do we, instead of waiting months or quarters in order to develop an architecture and a future state vision and roadmap of where we're going, how do we start small, iterate, deliver it quickly, accelerate the time to value, and then refine it as we go?
Now, of course, we've heard from many businesses, and they all seem to want to get to digital transformation, but far fewer of them seem to know how to get there. How does the role of the enterprise architect fit into helping companies attain digital transformation?
Enterprise architects, their core job responsibility is to be an extension of company leadership and the executives who are looking at where the company is trying to go in the future, what all the different pieces are that need to be addressed in order to help them get there, and then establishing that future state vision and then developing a roadmap on how to get there. So this is what the company leadership is trying to do. The EA is there to help them figure out how to do that. So the executive can be looking outwards and forwards, and the enterprise architect is there to figure out how to deliver on the vision.
All right. Now, Chris, tools and frameworks are only part of a solution. There's always the people in the process. There's training. There's best practices. How should people think about attaining this new emphasis for EA when it comes to the whole holistic definition?
Well, I think, we want to take a step back, kind of look how Ryan was describing, that we're trying to elevate a lot of the value propositions and best practices that seem to be working for the most part in the agile solution delivery space and see how they might work for delivering that continual regular value. And thinking about that, one of the major quality attributes, at least in our experience, of the goodness of any architecture is based on how well it responds to change. So in some ways, one might make the claim that agile and enterprise architecture are somewhat synonyms of one another. I mean, that's if you're doing good enterprise architecture, you must certainly be agile because responding to change is one of those quality attributes. That's a part of the traditional approach of architecture being concerned with interoperability and integration. Again, like Ryan said, there's as it relates to techniques and tools and frameworks, we want to exploit the experiences practices that we've had in the past and try to really push those forward into really more of a new operating model for enterprise architects and how they engage the rest of the organization. So not starting from scratch, trying to really embrace the whole concept of reuse, particularly reuse of knowledge and information, is a good best practice, obviously. So that's why, in 2019, you certainly don't want to be inventing your own architecture method or your own architecture framework. And of course, there may be a requirement for various reasons to do some tailoring or adaptation to your environment. So starting with things like TOGAF, particularly its architecture development method, reference models that might be out there for individual vertical industries to help accelerate adding value. The challenge that I've seen is a lot of architecture teams get really sucked into the methodology and the framework, semantics and concepts, and spend lots of time trying to figure out how to do things in tools. And we really want to try to think about how can we enable the architecture profession in the same way that we're trying to help enable other people do their jobs with instant-on service offerings using some modern common platforms and some of those industry frameworks that are out there. And the same methods, you need to have some background on what they are and how to do them. People are thinking about, or we've seen people be more focused on not just what is the framework, but help us understand how we apply it. So that's, again, really trying to close that feedback loop. TOGAF makes perfect sense in a 4-day certification class. Of course, often it doesn't to a lot of people, but people often then still struggle with, well, how do I make this real in my organization? So partnering with organizations that have had that kind of experience that can help, again, close that gap and accelerate the usage of that in a valuable fashion is pretty important.
So it seems a little bit ironic because I've heard of some instances where enterprise architects are actually being laid off, but it sounds increasingly like the role is a keystone to digital transformation. So what's the mismatch there, Chris? Why do we see in some cases the EA position being undervalued, even though it seems critical?
I think you've identified something that, of course, has happened multiple times in the various pendulum swings that happen in our industry, particularly when there's a lot of change going on. People are getting perhaps a little conservative. We've certainly seen this in the context of fiscal downturns in economic climates. But to me, it really points to, again, like you said, the irony of what we perceive in the architecture profession based on successes that we've had, that enterprise architecture is an essential part of running your business. But if executives don't believe that and have experienced that, then it's not surprising that when there's an opportunity to make some changes in investment priorities, that enterprise architecture might not be at the top of the list. But we do need to be mindful of, we are in a particular point in time with the architecture profession where a lot of organizations do struggle with the glass ceiling of enterprise architecture. It's something we've encountered, unfortunately, pretty regularly, where executives are like, I really don't get what this EA thing is, and more importantly, what's in it for me? Why should I give you my support and resources? But what's interesting about that, of course, if you take a step back, is you don't see executives saying the same thing about human resources or accounting. Again, not to suggest that they aren't thinking about ways to optimize that, thinking about, is this a core competency, is it a strategic thing, so on and so forth. So we do have an issue with just the acceptance of enterprise architecture based on the educational and development experiences that a lot of executives have had. And we're very hopeful that that trend is going to be moving in a different direction, particularly as it relates to new master's programs and doctorate programs, for example, in enterprise architecture that start really elevating and legitimizing enterprise architecture as a profession so that when people are going through an MBA program, they will have heard of enterprise architecture and it being an essential part of delivering upon strategy.
Ryan, looking again at what's preventing companies from attaining their desire for digital transformation, what are some of the major challenges? What's holding up enterprises from getting, say, more used to real-time data and gaining agility and intelligence about how they do things?
So I think there's a couple of things going on. And one of them ties back to what Chris was just talking about the role of enterprise architects and the role of architects in general. One of the things with digital transformation is we're seeing a shift in the relationship between what was business versus IT. With digital transformation, business functions and IT functions become entirely and holistically integrated. They're inseparable. Wherein, there is no IT organization, there is no IT process, there is no business process. There's just the process. And the two are intertwined. And as we look at driving for use of real-time data, and as we look at leveraging enterprise architecture, it's how do we move beyond just the relationship with business and IT, and how do we look at functions like data management and architecture, and how do we bring them into this integrated conversation with the folks who were part of the business and IT teams in the past. And we actually see a good example of how companies can do this in one of the recent releases from the Open Group in the digital practitioner body of knowledge, where that body of knowledge has looked at it and said, you know what, there's a core skill set, which is just general, what does it mean to be a practitioner in the digital era, regardless of your job role or your focus. And what it's saying is we need to collapse the job roles and look at it more holistically, and everyone needs to have both a business mindset and a set of technical skills. And we need to bring those together. And that's really important. And so as we look at what's holding up digital transformation for taking it the next step to real-time data, it's really broadening the scope of what we're considering under the umbrella of digital transformation and including these other functions that were once considered centralized assets like EA, like data management, and bringing them into the fold and say, you know what, you're part of the digital transformation story as well. And you're key to bringing us along the next stage of this journey, which is looking at, okay, we digitally transformed. Now, how do we optimize? How do we bring in the data? How do we use it more effectively? How do we leverage technology in new ways? The second thing we've got is a mindset issue. And this is something that's particularly an issue with enterprise architects right now. And that is enterprise architects and everyone in digital professions needs to be living in the present. You talk about the fact that some EAs are getting laid off. Well, why is that? Well, let's think about how they approach their job in terms of the questions that would be asked in a performance review. Hey, what have you done for me over the years? Well, if you're focused on what you did in the past, you're probably going to get laid off. What you did in the past is great, but the company's operating in the present. What's your grand idea for the future about the ideal situation? Yeah, well, that's probably going to get you shoved in a corner someplace and then probably eventually laid off because companies don't know what the future is going to be. They may have some idea of where they want to get to, but they can't articulate a 5 or 10 year vision right now because the environment's changing so quickly. The what have you done for me lately, which is my favorite thing that we see in performance review discussions, is great. It got you your paycheck because you did your job over the last 6 months, but that's not really what companies care about, and that's not really what enterprise architects and folks should be supporting on. It should be, what can you do for me over the next few months, focusing on the present and the near-term future. That's what gets enterprise architects a seat at the table. That's also what gets the entire organization and all the job functions contributing to digital transformation aligned to delivering near-term value. And if you're entirely focused on delivering near-term value, you've achieved business agility.
Chris, we're also seeing some major changes in the IT landscape. To Ryan's point, nothing stays the same for very long. We're seeing a lot more use of cloud and services. We're seeing composability, automation increasingly used. And it seems like we're shifting from building to assembly. Doesn't that really fit in well, though, to what EAs do, focusing on the assembly and on the structure of what to do with automation, sort of an abstraction above putting in systems and configuring them?
Oh, absolutely, Dana. And so it's a little bit ironic that, the profession that's often been coming up with the concepts and thought leadership around reuse, that's been pretty successful at the implementation operating level, either with, code libraries and open source or a cloud SaaS, as you were talking about, perhaps struggle a little bit with how do they really internalize that within their organization. So there's, the leading organizations are identifying the opportunities to really deliver on some of the promises that we have been hopeful about for some time here. So, for example, there's, like I said earlier, no reason to invent a new method or a new framework. There's plenty of them out there, and try to figure out how we can exploit those to our competitive advantage and focus on those things that only we can do, such as understanding our organization's business strategy, our culture, our vision, and try to deliver value in the context of that. The the challenge that organizations are having is how exactly best to deliver upon that. So, for example, one of the common best practices in enterprise architecture is to create things called reference architectures, basically patterns that represent best practices, many of which, of course, can be, again, created from existing content. So if you're doing cloud or if you're doing microservices, so on and so forth, elevating that up to different types of business models. There's a lot of good content out there from standards organizations to give organizations a good place to start. But one of the things that we've observed is a lot of architecture communities tend to focus more on building, as you were saying, those reference architectures and don't really focus on as much as they ought to on how do we make sure that the organization knows that this content exists, being able to demonstrate empirically that it's been used and has made a difference. We've got a great opportunity to really kind of connect a couple of dots of these different communities that are often not working together and really provide that architecture leadership to really pull it all together and deliver, again, great results and positive behavior.
And Chris, just for the background and understanding for our audience, tell us what Spark Services North America is, what you all do, and how you're related and how you work in conjunction with the Open Group.
So Spark Services is focused on helping end-user organizations be successful with enterprise architecture and related professions such as solution architecture, solution delivery, systems engineering. And we do that by taking advantage of the frameworks and best practices that standards organizations like the Open Group create, helping make those standards real, practical, and pragmatic for end-user organizations, providing guidance on how to adapt and tailor them and provide them support while they actually use those frameworks for doing real work, and then provide a feedback loop to the Open Group to help understand what kind of questions that end-user organizations are asking about, opportunities for improving existing standards, areas where we might want to invest in new standards to, again, really help continue to accelerate the use of enterprise architecture best practices.
Ryan, moving on to what's working and what's helping foster better digital transformation, tell us a little bit about, for those enterprise architects who want to say what they're going to do over the next couple of months, the short to medium term and the high value activities. Tell us a little bit now about what's working. How does EA fit into that?
That's a great question. We've talked a little bit about some of the challenges. It's important to focus on the bright spots as well. So what's working that an enterprise architect can do today in order to foster digital transformation? Number one, embrace agile approaches and an agile mindset in both architecture development and how you do your job and the solutions you develop for your organizations. And a good way to ask and to test whether you are approaching architecture in an agile way is the first iteration of your architecture. Can you go through the entire process or in TOGAF the ADM on a cocktail napkin in the time it takes you to have a beer with your boss? If so, great. It means you're focusing on that first simple iteration and then building it from there. Number two, solve problems today with the components you have today. Don't be pie in the sky looking to the future. Look at what you have today and how you can create the most value possible out of those. Because tomorrow the environment's going to change. And you can focus on tomorrow's problems and tomorrow's challenges tomorrow. Solve today's problems today. Third, look beyond your current digital transformation initiative and the work going on today and talk to your leaders, talk to your business clients about where they need to go in the future. That goal is enterprise business agility, which is helping the company become more nimble. Digital transformation is the first step. Start looking at steps 2 and 3. The next one is embrace kind of a sunk cost philosophy. Okay, great. We did a lot of things in the past, but we have what we have today for a reason, and we need to focus on where we go tomorrow. So don't get caught up on past decisions and investments. Focus on where are you today and what are the next steps you need to take. The last one is architects need to understand technology a little bit better. Fast-moving, emerging technology, things like new cloud services, IoT, edge computing, machine learning, artificial intelligence. These are more than just buzzwords and initiatives. They're real technology advancements that are going to have a large disruptive effect on your businesses and the solutions that support those businesses. You need to understand these technologies. You need to start playing with them so you can truly be a trusted advisor to your organization about how to apply those technologies in the business context.
Yeah, Chris, of course, we hear an awful lot about AI and machine learning these days. How do you expect enterprise architects to help organizations leverage AI and machine learning to get to that digital transformation, it seems really essential to me to become more data-driven, analytics-driven, and then to repurpose, to reuse those analytics over and over again and to attain an ongoing journey of efficiency and automation.
Well, I think what we're really talking about here is trying to learn from our customers, speaking from, an internal architecture practice perspective. So as we're working with our partners, trying to figure out how they're going to use, AI and machine learning to help run the business, do better product development, 360-degree the customer, so on and so forth. It's kind of one of those weird things where we see the shoemaker's children, don't have shoes because they're so busy making shoes for everybody else, that there's a real opportunity when we look at some of the infrastructure that's really required to support the agile enterprise and is to, well, why don't we exploit those same sorts of technologies to help us do our jobs in enterprise architecture? So it is an emerging part of the profession. We and others are, beginning to do some research on that. But when I think of how much time we have spent, as well as our clients have spent in having to do a lot of the nuts and bolts collection of data and normalization of data and all that kind of funky stuff, it sure seems like there's a real opportunity to leverage these emerging technologies for the benefit of the architecture practice, so that the architects, again, are more focused on building relationships with people, understanding strategy, and less time spending trying to figure out where the data is and what the data means and where to get the data. Not to trivialize that, obviously humans still need to be involved, but I think there's a great opportunity to kind of eat our own dog food, as it were, and see if we can exploit some of that, those learnings for the benefit of the architecture community and its consumers.
And Chris, do we have any concrete examples of this at work where the EA has elevated themselves, found that right time frame, exposed the value in the business outcomes terms? How do we look to concrete either examples, named or unnamed, to better understand what's possible when you do this right?
What we're seeing is, a lot of organizations are not unusually are working things kind of from the bottoms up. So that often starts in, IT operations and then moves into solution delivery. And of course, that's where there's been a lot of good progress in improved methods and techniques, such as scaled agile and DevOps. But a lot of organizations do struggle to elevate it a little bit higher. And if we take a look, for example, at the digital practitioners body of knowledge from the Open Group, provides a lot of guidance on to help organizations figure out how do they navigate that journey, particularly getting to the fourth level of the learning progression, which is at the enterprise level. And that's where enterprise architecture becomes essential, because it's great to be able to develop software fast, although, of course, that's really not the whole point of agile solution delivery. It should be about building the right software the right way to meet the right kind of requirements and do that as rapidly as possible. And we need to have an umbrella over the different release trains, for example, to make sure that the organization as a whole is marching forward. So we've been working with a number of Fortune 100 companies that have made some good progress, again, at the operational implementation levels, and are now finding that particularly trying to connect business architecture, which there have been some great advancements in that from the Business Architecture Guild and how that's been influencing the Open Group's architecture framework, to really connect the dots across those agile communities so that the learnings of a particular release train or the strategy of the enterprise is clearly understood and being delivered by all those different communities.
All right, Ryan, looking to the future, what should organizations be doing? How can the enterprise architect role and function change in order to help them attain what they're looking for? What's got to happen next?
Yeah, I think the next step and what needs to happen, it doesn't just apply to enterprise architects, but really all types of architects, which is look at the job role and how your job role needs to evolve over the next few years and how you need to be approaching it differently than you've done it in the past. For example, we're seeing enterprise architects increasingly focus on issues like security, risk, reuse, integration with a partner ecosystem. So how do you integrate with other companies? How do you work in the broader environment? We're seeing business architects who've been deeply engaged in digital transformation discussions over the last couple of years to start looking forward and shifting their role to focus on how do we light up this real-time decision-making capability. Solution architects are shifting from building and designing components to designing assembly and designing the end-to-end systems that are often built out of third-party components instead of things that were built in-house. So it's looking at your job role and understanding that the core need hasn't changed. Companies need enterprise architects and business architects and solution architects more than ever right now to get them where they need to be. But the people serving those roles need to do that in a new way, and a way that's focused on the future and focused on what are the business needs over the next 6, 12, 18 months, and that's slightly different than what they've done in the past.
All right. Where can organizations and individuals as well go to learn more, either about Agile and the enterprise architect role, as well as what the Open Group is offering, as well as what Spark Services is offering? Tell us some places to go and where to learn more.
Okay, a couple of places they can go. The Open Group has some great resources available. We've got an event coming up here in the next few weeks in Denver, focused on Agile enterprise architecture and some of the latest thoughts coming out of the Architecture Forum, Digital Practitioner Working Group, and such. It's a great opportunity to go learn about those things, network with others, discuss how other companies are approaching these problems. So I definitely point them there. I mentioned the Digital Practitioner Body of Knowledge. This is a recent release from the Open Group, really looking at the future of IT and technologist type roles, which includes architects. Some great forward-looking thinking there. I encourage folks to go take a look at that, provide feedback, get involved in that discussion. And then Spark Services North America, at the end of the day, we're here to help architects be more effective in adding value to their organization, be it through tools, training, consulting, best practices, standards. We're here to help, so feel free to reach out to our website, sparksystems.us, and we're happy to talk with you and see how we might be able to help.
All right, very good. I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. You've been listening to a sponsored BriefingsDirect discussion on reinforcing the relationship between enterprise architecture and agile businesses. And we've learned how enterprise architects should embrace such approaches and digital practitioner leading edge thinking in order to build more competitive advantage for their companies. So a big thank you to our guests. We've been here with Ryan Schmierer. He's the Director of Operations at Spark Services North America. Thank you so much, Ryan.
Thank you, Dan.
And also thank you to Chris Armstrong, President at Spark Services North America. Thank you, Chris.
You're more than welcome, Dana.
And a big thank you as well to our audience for joining this BriefingsDirect Agile Business Innovation discussion. I'm Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions, your host throughout this series of BriefingsDirect discussions sponsored by the Open Group. Thanks again for listening. Please pass this along to your IT community and do come back next time.